Welcome to Marketing, Media, and Money, your go-to podcast for proven profitable strategies, secrets, and resources from industry experts and global influencers to help you scale your business, shorten your learning curve, and stand out in a crowded, noisy marketplace. Here's your host, award-winning marketing and media strategist and international speaker, Patty Farmer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. I'm excited today because we're going to talk about leadership, but specifically, we're going to talk about leading outside the lines. Ooh, doesn't that just make you feel all excited? Because I love that topic, right? Because I don't like doing anything inside. So outside the lines works for me. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. So Tina Parker is the founder of Lead Outside the Lines. She brings a unique, heart-centered, science-backed approach to leadership success by design, not by default. With a distinguished career as a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, co-creator of the Air Force's innovation catalyst AFWorks, recognized by Fast Company as a world best in 2020, a former C-level executive and business owner, she understands the resilience needed to lead with courage and authenticity in a rapidly evolving world. Tina has been a trusted guide for hundreds of visionary change makers, empowering them to break free from stagnation, unlock possibilities, and execute their vision with clarity, courage, and confidence. She walks the talk as a TEDx speaker and the Great American Speak-Off semifinalist, with a master's in leadership and management, certifications in neuroencoding, brain health, transformational mindset facilitation, human-centered design, DISC behavioral consulting, and executive leadership. So she definitely knows how to walk her talk, and she definitely knows how to lead outside the lines. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So Tina, thank you so much for being here with me.
Well, thank you, Patty, for having me on. I'm really excited for this conversation with you.
I'm really excited too, because I really want to deep into this. I've known you for a few years now. We met when we were both going to a mastermind, and literally we roomed together. We actually met before that, but online. But then we actually went to this mastermind and we roomed together, and the rest, they say, is history, right? So now, literally, I think you're one of my closest friends. You write for my magazine, and pretty much you're the go-to person for any time I think that there's anything that has to do with leadership. You're like on the short list always. And I love that you always lean in and say yes. So thank you so much for that.
So I appreciate not to say yes to you, Patty.
I love that. So let's kind of dive right in. So I have to tell you, you shared a story with me once about how we just got done sharing all these massive, amazing accomplishments, right? But we all know that with accomplishments, there's always a price to pay, right? There's, especially if, we can get burnt out. There's a lot of things that can go on, right? Mm-hmm. And so can you share with us the story about how you, for you, it was like, I checked all the boxes, but then what?
Right, exactly. Well, and I think a lot of us we're high achievers, we have big goals, big dreams, we want to make a big impact in the world. We just go, right? We have this inner motor that just keeps us going. And for me, that's what it was. I was so focused on creating value wherever I was, doing all the things, checking all the boxes to work my way up the ladder, right? To bring a lot of value and impact wherever I was. But what happened for me is I was doing all the things, right? And I think a lot of your readers can probably attest to that for their own lives, right? We wear so many hats in life, like mom, wife, mother, mom, wife, business owner, executive. And for me, I was doing military at the same time, right? So I was working for Homeland Security as a director of communication. I was a director of current operations for my military reserve, Air Force Reserve component. I was building a business with my now ex-husband. So there's part of the story there, right? And just doing all the things, getting my master's degree, checking all the boxes that we're quote unquote supposed to check to be successful, And I thought I was doing all the things I was supposed to do until life kind of has a way of smacking you upside the head when you're out of alignment with where you're supposed to be. And for me, what that looked like was a 4-year period where the big 4Ds, like the big 4 stressors, we call them the big 4Ds, happened in 4 years. Death, divorce, debt, and disease, all in 4 years. So on the outside, on the outside, everything looked great. But on the inside, clearly, my personal life and my health was falling apart. And I remember actually sitting in my car, driving to work one day after all this had happened. And I just sat there and I couldn't get out. I couldn't get out of the car. I felt stuck right there in my seat. And I said, what is going on here? I'm doing all the things I think I'm supposed to do. What's happening in my life? And what was happening for me, what I came to understand after about a decade of going deep into human transformation and leadership and what is it that drives us, I was out of alignment with what was really important for me. And while I thought I was showing up as a good leader for my people at work, they watch what we do more than they listen to what we say. Right? So
kids.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like kids. We're like, do as I say, not as I do. No, if you go in at 6 a.m., you don't leave till 6 p.m., but you're trying to tell them to have a good life and, go enjoy your life and don't burn yourself out. They're like, what are you doing? Right. And so for me, that's what it was. And I was like, okay, I get to define my own definition of success, not trying to check the boxes of everyone else's definition that I think I'm supposed to be checking, because that is what was causing the burnout for me.
That's a lot, right? Going through, like, for some people, just going through one of those things or 2 of those things, but all 4 of those things, wow, that was kind of a slap you up beside the face and said, something's got to change, right?
It is. And for high achievers, we can sometimes need a little bit more slapping upside the head because we're kind of stubborn, right? We're focused, we're driven. But for me, when the first thing was I lost my son to stillbirth. And the week before that happened, I had been sick. I had a fever. I wasn't feeling well, but got to be at work, got to push through. And I don't blame myself. Things happen. At the same time, I got to be responsible for, hey, I kind of need to pay attention to my own well-being, right? And then I was pregnant right away with my daughter. So a little bit anxiety going on during that time. 6 months after I gave birth to her, cancer. And I thought, what in the world? And the doctors actually shared with me, and I hope that your listeners will take this to heart for themselves, is they said, look, we don't usually find this particular type of tumor in this location, and it usually will kill you within 10 years. So if you had not come in and had this screening done, which I almost didn't, right? Because I'd missed so much work already. I was like, I can't miss more work. They said, if you had not come in, you'd be dead in 10 years. Wow. So that was a big wake-up call. And after trying to get all that together, the divorce happened. I said, okay, it is time. It is time to do this differently because I wanted it all, right? And I think all of us do. We want it all professionally. We want it all personally. And there is a way. I just was going about it all the wrong way. So that is when I just surrendered. I said, okay, I am going to learn from the experts in the field of transformational mindset, neuroencoding, leadership, brain health, human transformation. How do we do this and still achieve success personally in leadership and lead ourselves well in our own lives at the same time?
I think that's really important too, because sometimes it just leads to a meltdown, right? And I don't know about you, but I have had times where I would tell my husband, I would say, babe, I am so busy right now that I literally don't have time today to go to the bathroom or eat. I'll have to make a choice. But you know what I mean? And I would get on the phone with clients and say, hey, can you hold on 1 second? Because I have to go to the ladies' room or whatever, right? Because I couldn't schedule my time better. But you know what? As CEOs, we own our time. We own our schedule. We own our calendar, right? Otherwise, we're not a CEO, we're a firefighter, right? And we're just putting out fires. And I feel like when you shared the story with me, when we became friends, like, I feel like it's so easy to resonate with that story. Now, to different degrees for people, right? I mean, different degrees, but sometimes I think, especially women, I think we feel sometimes like we should be able to do it all, right? We should be able to do it all. Like, we're supposed to balance these things. And notice that nowhere in there, in your story of those things, was there time to be us, right? Nowhere in there was there time to be like us, right? We're the mom and the wife and the friend and the business owner and the whatever. But nowhere in there did you say that if you do those things right, that you also can have time for yourself too, because really, kind of like the mask, right? On the plane, you have to take care of yourself first before you can serve others, right? Yep. So I feel like really that is what's so important. And I know that when you and I had that discussion and we were sharing, I remember we stayed up so late that night, you were sharing with me what inspired you to develop the Scale Up framework. And, I just love the name, but I feel like before I actually ask you to go there, and I do want to, I feel like when you were telling us these are the things you did, I think people could choose to just say, you know what, I'm just burned out. I just want to do something else. Maybe I'll go get a job or whatever the case may be. And then they don't feel fulfilled because they do want those things. But sometimes the price is high if you don't have the right balance and if you don't go about it the right way, right? So I feel like when you shared with me how this actually inspired you to develop this Scale Up framework, right? Yeah. How did your background influence its creation? Now, you just shared that whole story, but how did you go from that story? You started doing all this, work, right? Like getting, certified at all these things and learning that. But still, once you did that, while you were doing all that, you had to figure out, like, where is it going to go? What am I going to create? How do I want that to change? And would you say, so I guess it's going to be a two-part question. So that's the second part. The first part question I feel is, in the beginning, I feel like when I create too, I first do it for me. Like, I'm like, oh man, something has to change. Like, I need to do it. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, like if this works for me, like what would happen if I like served others and taught it to other people? And then kind of like it's our passion, and then it becomes our mission. And then it becomes like, we put our values all in there, and then it aligns with what our mission is, and all those beautiful things all happen. So I guess that's what I really kind of want to know. Like, through all that, you had to make those changes for yourself. And then when you get to the other side, now you're inspired to create this framework. So kind of tell us, like, how did that all happen? And then let's kind of dive into the framework. Cause I got to tell you, I love that you have this Scale Up framework and it only has 5 steps, right? Because after listening here with, right. Cause it sounds like there should be like 25 things, right? And then you got to do all this work, and it's going to take you years, and you managed to do all of that work and then be able to create it in a framework where there's only 5 steps, which I think is such a beautiful thing. So let's talk about that.
Yes, I'd love to, because you're right. We've got to do it for ourselves first, right? And that's one of the biggest things about this work is it's not theoretical. These are things that I've applied in my own life and my clients apply in their life. Like, there's no theory of like, go try and do this thing, maybe it'll work. No, because for me, what I realized in that moment when I said, okay, there's got to be a better way. What is that? And like you said, there's so many things that we can do. Mm-hmm. And I was tired of the Band-Aid approach. I was tired of the gurus are like, go do this one thing. It's going to change your life. And you try to do the thing, but it's not aligned with how I function. It's not aligned with what's important for me. And like, so it's really hard for us to take steps and actions that are not aligned with who we are, how we are, right? How we are in the world, what's important for us, how we're wired. And that was the biggest missing piece that I found, because I met with a whole lot of leaders. I've worked with flag officers, 4-star generals, all the way down to the person just starting out their career, right? So every level of leadership. And what I found for myself and for the people that I've worked with and talked with is the higher up you get in your career, the more pressure you feel to perform, to show up, right? And when that's the case, I saw so many people struggling with the same things I was struggling with, putting aside how they really function, their authentic selves, what was really important for them, so they can show up in this box that they think they're supposed to be showing up as. And that's what's going to get them to success. No, what it actually does is it burns you out completely. And one of the things that I really love, and we'll get into the framework about Scale Up, is because it's different, because it starts with how you are uniquely wired, right? A lot of these leadership programs are like, go do these things, change your actions, change your behaviors, you get different results. Yes, that's true. However, that's incomplete. If all you do is focus on changing the actions before you understand how you're wired, what drives you, you are missing the mark, right? It's like all the times, January 1st, when we say, oh, this is the year I'm going to go run every single morning. But you don't see yourself as a runner. You're not wired for running, but you think that's what you're supposed to do. How long do you stay? How long does that resolution last? Like 2 days? How long? Hey, and so the whole point of Scale Up is scaling up every area of your life from the inside out. We try to look at it from the outside in, all these things I think I'm supposed to do, should do, right? We should all over ourselves, and that is not a good look for anybody. So anytime we're like, I should be doing that. No, we get to stop and go, what's my structure? That's the S in Scale Up, right? My internal structure, the stories I'm telling myself, the structure of how I'm wired. And then we have to get clear on what's really important for us. And clarity is that second step. Clarity of our vision, clarity of our identity. Because a lot of times what happens is if we don't identify as a certain person, a certain way of being, but we're trying to force ourselves into that square, not going to happen, right? And that's where the burnout happens. We think it's because we have so many things on our plate and so much going on. It's not. It's because we are not clear on who we are and we're not in alignment, which is the A in scale, with how we are naturally wired and how we want to show up and what's important to us, right? And then the last two, and then we can go on, is leadership is the L in scale, but it's different. It's inner leadership. A lot of leadership, and rightfully so, talks about leading others, but leadership is really influence, and we have to start with ourselves. So in Scale Up, we talk about how can we shift from a reactive state, which is our natural default, right, to creative states. And then the E is engagement. Because if our vision's big enough, which for a lot of us it is, we can't do it by ourselves. So we have to communicate our value and engage people around us to help us elevate to the next level.
I love that. And part of the Scale Up framework is creating your authentic alignment code, right? So what is that, and how does it affect our ability to move forward faster?
Oh my gosh. So authentic alignment code is everything. It basically is when we do the S and the C, we are pulling your psychology, your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, mindset, right? Your values, your purpose, your vision, all of these things together to understand how are you uniquely wired and what's important for you. By pulling all of these things together, we create your alignment code. It becomes your North Star that every time you're making a decision, right, you know, is that aligned for me? If yes, great, go in that direction. If no, then you have a decision. Okay, if it's out of alignment, is that something that I really want to do or not? Understanding that when something is not in alignment for us, it takes a lot of energy for us to show up and perform, right? And so that's where a lot of the burnout comes in, is we're trying to show up in a way that is not aligned with who we are and how we are. And it takes a lot of energy and burns us out. The other part about the alignment code is that the more aligned we are with our authentic self, the more creative we are, the more adaptable we are, the more resilient we are. And in this world that is changing faster than most of us can keep up with, that is so important. It's not about what's outside of us. It's about tapping into our personal North Star and leading and living from that aligned place.
I love that so much because I feel like it's really important. And actually, you don't know it yet because the magazine's not out, but alignment and authenticity is part of my article. This.
I can't wait to read it.
Okay, it's about that, but in a little bit different way than you're teaching. Like you really talk about like leadership, and mine is really about algorithms versus authenticity and alignment. So anyway, that was a little sneak peek. But what would you say to people who think that the concept of alignment and authenticity are like woo-woo? You know, I feel like sometimes people are like, oh, that is so woo-woo. Not that there's anything wrong with woo-woo. I'm not, capping on woo-woo. But I know that sometimes people say, oh, that's just woo-woo and that's too soft for business, right? And I've heard both of those things, right? Which kind of, I feel either says something about somebody or maybe they don't really understand it, right? Because I know that in the beginning for me, I used to feel like that about woo-woo. Like I used to like, oh, that's woo-woo, right? And I kind of really wasn't on the woo-woo train. Like I just was like, no, and I kind of really wasn't really there. And it took me a while for me to really, really understand that digging deep and stuff, what it meant to me, right? We, again, just like alignment, you get to decide what aligns with you. And even if that's woo, right? And stuff though, but too soft. I hear that, oh, that's too soft for business, right? Where would you say, what would you say to people who would say that?
I've heard it quite a few times, and coming from a military background, right? 23 years in the Air Force. Yeah. Anytime you bring up these soft skills, you kind of get a little bit of a resistance. What I will say is we've proven time and time again through even our work with AFWorks, the Air Force Innovation Catalyst, what set us apart and made it so successful that Fast Company recognized us as a world best. Like we beat Amazon in 2020 when it came to best workplace for innovators. Like, wow. It doesn't even make sense when you look at like we're government, right? But what it was is that we created a space for all of us to bring our authentic gifts to the table. We were charged with doing things differently, thinking outside the box, right? Looking beyond the horizon to create solutions for what's needed, not just fix problems of what already happened, right? And so how many companies are out there that need to be looking ahead and seeking the solutions for what's coming because of everything that's changing? It was the authenticity of each one of us producing, hey, here's my crazy idea. What do you think about it? Right? But creating a space where that was accepted, right? Where we didn't hold back and go, oh, someone's going to think that sounds ridiculous. They're going to judge me, right? And so what I want to share with folks is when we create the space for each one of us to show up authentically, we are actually smarter. We come up with better ideas. We have better perspectives, the collective wisdom of the crowd together, right? It's only through that authenticity that can happen. Otherwise, you get people who are trying to keep themselves in this tiny little box because they don't want to be judged, right? They don't want to sound crazy. They don't want to be separate from everybody else. And you don't get great ideas, right? It's what happened with Kodak. It's what happened with Blockbuster. Like, do you want to be Netflix or do you want to be Blockbuster? You get to choose. And authenticity and aligning with values to bring in like-valued people, all of that is what leads to things like what happened with us at AFWorks. And if you look at conscious capitalism companies, the companies that outperform S&P 500 companies by 1,000%, that is one of the things that's most impactful for them is being authentic, courageous, or conscious leadership, right? Showing up consciously, authentically aligned. So just look at the numbers.
Wow. Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't lie. So many leaders, I feel, struggle to balance, professional success with personal well-being and fulfillment. So what specific strategies does Scale Up offer to help individuals prioritize self-care while they're pursuing their ambitious and alignment goals?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because there's so many things that we can do. But within scale, one of the biggest things that we're trying to help our folks do, and I love seeing this pop with our clients when they get it, is your personal definition of success, right? We are all imprinted and conditioned just from life with a meaning of what it means to be successful. And whenever I'm working with clients and I ask them, hey, how do you know when you're successful? Like they give me the standard. I got the money in the bank, the 2.5 kids, the title, the white picket fence, the house, like all the stuff, right? External stuff. And then the question of, is that fulfilling for you? Most of the time, it's not. They're like, no, it's, yeah, I got the stuff, but there's something missing. There's something else here for me, right? And they feel a pull to another level of contribution, but they're like, I'm already doing so many things. Like, there's no way I can add more to my plate. And look at all these things that I've already accomplished. And it's like, okay, yes, you've accomplished those things, but whose box were you checking? Whose meaning of success were you checking? Was it yours? And most of the time it's not. And so when we pull the framework together, it gives them each their own individual definition of success. Again, it's part of that alignment code where they can consistently go, okay, I am moving closer to my definition of success. And that fulfillment is there. That fulfillment generates energy, vitality, right? It keeps the burnout at bay. And it helps you to align again with your authentic path, because that fulfillment will energize you. If you're trying to check the box of someone else's success, it's this downward spiral of reactivity and unfulfillment.
I love that. So we were just talking about like how people have different definitions of success. And that is so true, right? And I think we evolve all the time. And I know that over time, what I would consider success when I was younger was to do more. Yeah. Now, as I've gotten older, I find success is really that I'm able to do less. So my definition of success has changed. But I know that you have kind of a bit of a different take on leadership than the standard definition. And I know you talked a little bit about how it is inward, but I mean, lead outside the lines. I love that whole, just what it makes you think of when you just hear that. So can you share a little bit about how you see it differently, but why do you see it differently? Because that's the heart of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I see leadership differently than most because I look at it from an inside out perspective. We have to lead ourselves well before we can truly lead others well, right? We're really good. A lot of us are really good at putting the mask on and acting like, oh, I got it all together. It's all good. And we think that we're leading other people. We're not. We're leading them down a path of burnout, just like we're leading ourselves, right? And so one of the things that I really love about this journey that I've been on is the brain health and the neuroencoding and transformational mindset. Like the reason I went deep into those is because I wanted to understand how do we shift from this, like I said, reactive downward spiral that can happen when we are on the hamster wheel and trying to check all the boxes and chasing someone else's definition of success, right? One of my clients calls it chasing the cookie. And I got the cookie, but it's the wrong cookie. And it didn't last. Like I'm totally unfulfilled. I got to chase the next cookie, right? But what's happening inside of us when we're doing that is, and I can show you, we don't have time to show everything, but there's actual neuroscience behind this. When we are in what we call a reactive state, anything that's fear-based, worried, stress, overwhelm, all of those types of emotions, parts of our brain actually shuts down. So we are starting, I know it's crazy. And I love this because I'm certified with Dr. Daniel Amen, who is the leading neuropsychiatrist in the world. We've got access to hundreds of thousands of brain SPECT scans to see what's happening in people's brains. And I even brought my daughter in. I've had my daughter has had her brain scanned because she was having some impulsivity issues. And after so much of the behavior correction on the outside, it was still hard for her to control her emotions, right? Emotional regulation. And so we actually took her in to one of Dr. Amon's clinics, which is how I got started on this, to see what was happening in her brain, right? And when we could see, oh, this is how her brain is functioning, for her, it was like all doors open all the time. So it was really hard for her to narrow in and focus and close down things that were making her feel overwhelmed. When we understood what was happening, we could help her with some behavior modification that was attuned for her, right? Counting, breathing,
In alignment.
heart math, in alignment for her. Exactly. And so understanding what's happening in our brain when we're in certain states, we learn how to shift into creative states like gratitude, compassion, courage, joy, right? These states actually light up parts of your brain that help you make better decisions, that help you have access to information you already know. You have better motor coordination, right? When your brain is shut down, when parts of your brain are shut down in these other reactive states, you go into a state of not being able to remember things. You have memory problems, dark mood, like things happen. It's not just because you feel bad or you feel good. It's because your brain is functioning better when you're in a creative state, right? But how many of us spend hours a day in overwhelm, fear, worry, stress, right? We're already starting behind the power curve. We're like a mile behind the finish line trying to catch up before the race starts. But when we learn how to shift, that's where true leadership comes in, because we get better ideas. We are in a creative upward spiral that's energizing and it's generative. So it's life-giving. We get to show up as better leaders from the inside, and it radiates out to everything we do and everyone we come in contact with.
It's so beautiful. I mean, like, who doesn't want that, right? I mean, that is just a beautiful thing. Who would not want that? So how does the framework, your scale-up framework, differ from other personal or professional development programs and get sustainable results? Like, just listen to what you're saying just sounds phenomenal, right? Yeah. But we do want sustainable results. So what is different about it than, say, other personal or professional development programs?
Yeah, sustainable results is the key, right? Because I said I was tired of the Band-Aid approach. I wanted something that would work no matter what I was doing. And so that's why we start with your internal structure, right? Because here's what actually happens. We think that our actions create results, right? And I said this before, they do, but what happens before that, right? What happens before you take an action? Your thoughts, your feelings, and your beliefs, which is your psychology, those drive the actions that we take or don't take, right? It depends on what we believe and what we believe about certain things. That's our mindset. So I'll share with you, with one of my clients, he's a very successful venture capitalist, and he wanted to start a new holding company based on some expertise that he had that's very different than the normal expertise in the VC world. And so we're talking about this, and he's telling me all the wonderful things that could come about by starting this new company and getting people involved in deep tech because he really understood it. And I'm like, great, like, I'm sold. What's the deal? And he goes, well, I'm just not doing what I know how to do this, but I'm not doing it. I'm feeling stuck. And so I said, okay, what is it that you're not doing? And he goes, I'm not talking about this. I said, why not? He goes, I don't like talking about myself. How many of us feel that way, right? We don't like to talk about ourselves. And so I asked him this question, and I hope that your readers will listen on this. So lean in. If you've tuned out for a second, lean in, because this question is important. I asked him, what do you believe about people who talk about themselves? He goes, they're total jerks. Like, didn't skip a beat at all. I'm like, okay, are you a jerk? He's like, no. And he's not. He's just a super great guy. I was like, so if you believe that people who talk about themselves are jerks, and you think going out and telling people about your expertise is you talking about yourself, what does that make you in your own mind? Right? And he sat there for a second, just like stunned, like, what? you're right. I'm not doing this because I don't want to be seen as a jerk. I'm like, this belief that you hold about people that talk about themselves and the meaning that you attribute to if you share your expertise. That's the only reason you're not stepping out into this really big opportunity that you know is your aligned path. So we crafted some messaging for him. So he was just sharing his expertise to help people, not feeling like, oh, look at me, I'm so special, right? Just sharing his expertise to help people. Within 2 weeks, 2 investors who had been standing on the sidelines kind of going, we like you, but we don't know what to do with you. Immediately, they were like, let's do this. We want to help you. Let's
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, they did. They raised the funding for it. They have this whole new venture going. So it was because of a belief that he held. That is the difference with this framework. Yes, we're going to get to the leadership. Yes, we're going to get to the communication and the engagement. Not until you understand how you're wired, because it's like putting a Band-Aid on a sucking chest wound. And we won't do it.
I always really feel like, you really got to get to the root, right?
Yeah.
You really got to get to the root. Otherwise, it's just going to keep on coming back.
Yes, it's like a weed, right? The weed keeps growing. And yes, you can spend a lot of time cutting it off, but it's managing a lot of this extra energy. Let's rip the weed out and let it be gone so it doesn't get in your way anymore. And you can move forward faster without getting stuck in the roadblocks.
I really think that can be key. Now, Tina, I know that you work with individual business owners, but you also work with businesses and organizations. And those are 2 different things, right? Both have to be in alignment, of course, right? But how do you work with them both? What are some of the different ways that you work with them? And can you tell us what are some of the different outcomes and focus areas when you're doing one and doing the other?
Sure. Yeah. Now, the framework works for both. That's the key is the framework. We utilize it for both. When we're working with an individual, we're really going into their individual core beliefs, right? Their mindset, their psychology, their values, what's really important for them. And then we utilize all of that to create their alignment code and aligned action plan, right? To where they want to be. And so when we're looking at an individual, it's really getting down to the core of what is it that you want to create in this world and why is that so important to you? And then we create the aligned pathway to make that happen. Now, when we're working with organizations, it's similar, but it's from an organizational standpoint. What is it that the organization is trying to achieve? What's the vision of the organization? How might the people who are making that vision happen align themselves with this vision? And we can uncover some areas where they may not be fully in alignment, and it's stopping them from showing up powerfully in their day-to-day work, right? And so the scale-up framework, it goes across the board. One of the things that's really powerful, though, within the framework is in the leadership portion, we talk about how to craft generative questions, okay? So when we're asking ourselves questions, it's our brain's like a Google search engine. So if you think about it from this perspective, it's just like with AI, right? The prompt that you put in there, the question that you ask will lead to certain answers. And so
input equals output for sure.
Exactly.
Input equals output.
Right. And so sometimes we don't know how to shape those questions in order to get the responses that we need and want, or to shift us into a creative state and out of a downward spiral, right? So from an individual perspective, we teach them how to ask these questions. When you approach an organization and a team with these questions and you create the safe space to allow the question to kind of percolate and people to really ruminate around it, it opens up doors. In fact, that is the leadership superpower of the future that Peter Drucker had mentioned back about 25 years ago, right? So I'm part of an organization with Marshall Goldsmith. It's for up-and-coming coaches called Forefront. Marshall Goldsmith was a founding member of Peter Drucker's foundation back in the 90s. And he shared with us one day, he said, I was sitting at the table when Peter said, The leader of today knows how to tell. The leader of the future will know how to ask. And
that's good.
Yeah. That is where generative questions come in, because it opens up possibilities and opportunities that we weren't even considering before. The questions that we ask will dictate the quality of the direction of our lives.
And you just don't know how much I love this, because I've been talking about how if you want better answers, ask better questions, right? For a very, very long time. I also really have dived deep into this concept of, instead of brainstorming, that it's not the way our brain thinks, of question storming. Yes. And so I had somebody on my podcast, Melina Palmer, and that she actually wrote a book about it. And when she actually broke it down, I was like, oh, now that's why it's so important to me, right? And really thinking about what that is. And so I feel like that is really important, because a lot of times we don't ask the right questions, and then we wonder why we don't get the answers. And I think you're right. In AI now, that has helped people to see it a little bit differently when they do prompts, and then they're like, oh, I do this problem. Why is this not telling me? And then somebody else gets it really good. It's also, is it aligned with you? Is it authentic to you? I mean, all of those, everything you're saying actually works with that as well. Yeah. But here's the thing. So you've just talked to us about how you work with these different sets of people, so to speak, like, teams and organizations versus, solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, business owners. Mm-hmm. Now, what does that look like in the sense of, like, so for entrepreneurs and business owners, I'm sure you work with them, one-on-one. I absolutely know you have a group program, because I have actually seen your workshop, which is phenomenal. I think I've watched it like 3 times now. So like, I know you do that, but how does that kind of translate over? In what ways and models do you use for the 2 different ones? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it's interesting because, organizations are made up of people, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah. So the framework aligns and for both. Now, if we're working individually with, with an entrepreneur or business owner, it's very focused on their specific pathway, right? We're basically laying out a pathway that is directly aligned for them. We look at where they are now, where they want to be, what's the gap, what's getting in the way, and how might we lay a foundation together of aligned actions for them to take to close the gap. Okay. So we do that through one-on-one coaching. We do that through a mastermind. We do have a mastermind that it's fascinating. I love it because it's different entrepreneurs from different industries. So you might think, oh, well, they don't get me. They're doing their thing. No, humans are humans, right? We're all working toward a meaningful outcome. And I like to use that instead of goals. Of course, we'll say goals, but it's really a meaningful outcome. What is the outcome that you want? Why does it matter? What is it about this outcome that is so important? And so when we're in the mastermind, everyone's doing their framework, and then we're sharing with each other, hey, what's working for you? Why is that working for you? What questions are you asking yourself? Because when we...
See, that's a good one right there. That's a really good one. Like, my brain is automatically going to, oh, well, if you like that, the thing would be, well, what questions are they asking? Because it's not that they're getting to a place that you might not be able to get to. It might not be aligned with you, but it could be that you're not asking yourself the right questions.
Exactly right.
Right? Because so that, I think, is super, super powerful right there.
Well, resources too, right? It's about pooling resources. It's about saying, hey, here's something I offer. Anybody need that? I'm looking for this. Who has something that can help me? Right? Because one of the things that we get into is like, we get stuck in how to do something, and we get to step back and ask those questions of what is it that I'm really wanting to create and why? We get that vision in our mind about what does it look like, smell like, feel like when it's working well and everything is going the way I want it to go, what does that feel like? Your brain actually opens up to start recognizing possibilities and opportunities aligned with that vision, right? This is the way our brains work. And so we do this even with organizations. When we go in with organizations, we're going to do discovery ahead of time with the organization. before we do maybe a workshop, right? We'll do a workshop around the Scale Up framework. We can do one-on-one coaching with specific individuals who are driving change, driving the innovation, driving the bus forward. But what we want to make sure of is in the discovery, like, what is it that the organization wants to create? What's the vision of the organization? What does that look like when it's working well? And where are we now compared to that, right? And so then we start applying the framework of scale to help people show up in their most creative way so that they can see possibilities and opportunities that maybe they were shut down to before. They can ask questions that open up possibilities that are way beyond what they're currently looking at. And it just helps them to move forward a lot faster.
And that can be super powerful, right? Because it really is about how can you move forward faster. That's what people really want.
Well, so I've heard it's like, that's the thing. How do you adapt in this changing world? How do you recognize something is out of alignment and adapt and before it smacks you upside the head, right?
It's kind of like how, when people go to therapy or they do inner work, right? Whatever the case may be. And they kind of learn that they have triggers, and then you see these triggers, and then when that trigger happens, this is how I adapt to that, and I change it. So this isn't exactly that, but I mean, in a way, if you've learned, like I know that I have learned what are my triggers, and now when they happen, and in a business aspect, sometimes when I recognize things that I do, I don't recognize it as fast as I would like to. When I wish I could say that every time I go down a rabbit hole, right? You know what I mean? I'd be like, oh, I'm going down a rabbit hole, or whatever the case may be, right? Yeah. But I think that it is really important to be able to adapt. Now, I'm very adaptable, but I would say that is really very core for me. However, I'm very adaptable. First, you have to recognize it first.
That's it.
You have to adapt until you recognize, right? So that's really important. And I have said many times, if people say to me, like if somebody says to me, oh, well, Patty, do you think maybe it could be this or whatever? Now, I may not always know what it is. And then if somebody says that, I'd be like, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting. Tell me more about that. So I'm coachable and I'm open. But I will tell you, I will know what it's not, because I do know myself that well. So if somebody says, oh, I'll be like, oh, no, it's absolutely not that. I may not always know what it is, but I'm really clear about what it is not. Yeah. So I do know myself that work. I've done a lot of work, right? The inner work. So I do. So in business, though, I think that is really interesting. So is that why Scale Up is considered next level for visionary leaders and business owners?
Yeah, it really is, because we work the inner work into it, right? It's not surface level, right? Just like you said, when we've done the inner work and we can recognize our triggers, we can recognize and just get curious, right? A big piece of scale is, as we go through, there are questions that are embedded throughout the entire framework that help to shift you into a curious state, a creative state, because we're really quick to go to judgment, right? So just like you would, and it's just our natural wiring, right? We like to say success by design, not by default, because we are naturally going to default the way our brains are wired to look for threats, look for what's wrong, because our brain is just trying to keep us safe. It's its job. Our brain's job is not to make us happy and successful, is to keep us alive. And so your brain is constantly looking for something that can get in the way of keeping you alive, that can make you uncomfortable, stressed, right? Take a lot of energy to do. It's like, no. I'm going to stick with what I know. And as long as I know it and I haven't died yet, I'm fine, right? Not the best way to use your brain, but that's just the default, right? And so we are going to default to judge things. What happens, though, when we are in a state of judgment is it is the graveyard for innovation, curiosity, and possibility. So part of Scale Up is helping us to do the inner work so that we can shift out of judgment and into curiosity. That is what allows us to step in next level and up level, no matter what it is we're doing, right? Notice we haven't said, if you're building a business, if you're losing weight, if you want to be a better parent, if you want to scale your current business up, because it doesn't matter what it is, you are the person showing up to do all of these things. That is what we get to scale up. And everything else is just an upward spiral from there.
I love that upward spiral. I mean, I love, so many people are worried that they're going to go on a downward spiral. Upward spiral is just a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So Tina, if somebody is feeling like they're out of alignment, right? You're thinking, you know what? Now that I've heard you say this, Tina, kind of feeling, whatever. Like, I don't want my audience to feel like, oh, you're totally screwed unless you're part of, scale up, right? You're totally screwed. Like, give it up right now. But I feel like, what are some of the things I want to make sure that they walk away with some questions that they could be asking themselves? Like, what is some self-reflecting that people could do? What are some questions that if they're thinking, you know what, I'm off, I'm not feeling fulfilled. I mean, it's not like we ask ourselves like, oh, I'm not feeling fulfilled, right? Unless somebody really asks us that question and positions it that way, we probably don't ask ourselves that. And we don't wake up and say, oh, I'm not feeling very fulfilled, right? What we're feeling is, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed and I'm so tired and I'm not sleeping well. Because what we're thinking about are the symptoms, right? These are the symptoms, right? So what would be like, 1, 2, or 3, whatever you feel comfortable with. What are some questions? So these are the writer downers. So everybody, so get ready. What are some questions for them to ask themselves that maybe will help them to understand that maybe they're ready for a shift, right? Maybe they're not in alignment. Maybe that the reason why they're not so happy and they come home at night and they're thinking, oh, I'm so tired. I want to go to bed like right after dinner, and I'm waking up in the morning and I'm already tired. And oh, just the thought. So before they get in the car and can't get out and ask themselves and say, I can't do this anymore, what are just a few questions that they could ask themselves that maybe they should be thinking, you know what? It's time for a change. And this isn't authentic to me. This is not in alignment for me. Where would they start? Like, what were some questions that they should ask themselves? And then the second part of that question would be, if you have a company or maybe you just have a team, are there things that we could be looking for that we're seeing in our team that maybe we could recognize that maybe we're not as healthy as we could be as a team?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So individual first and then team.
Sure. Yeah. On the individual level, you're right. We don't wake up and go, I just don't feel fulfilled today. You start to notice that you're maxed out, you're burnt out, you're tired, right? You're feeling stuck. You're feeling, a lot of times we recognize people feel this like pull to something more, but it's a little fuzzy, right? They're not really sure exactly what it is. They just know there's something more. It can't be this. Like, there's got to be more than this, right? When you ask yourself that question. And so what I like to help people connect to first is your vision of what you truly want in your life. Imagine everything is going as you would want it to be. What does that look like? Right? Just let yourself just get a little bit more of that kid-like, right, enthusiasm and curiosity of, if my whole life and my business was going exactly as I would want it to be, what's happening? You just connect to this vision, because that's going to shine a light on, oh, I would want it to be this, but this is actually happening. Okay, there's a gap, right? Maybe we can't identify what the gap is, but you see there's a gap. That's the first start, right? And then we ask, instead of going, well, I don't know how to fix that. Because here's what happens. If we don't know how, a lot of times we just don't do anything, because we don't,
exactly.
I'm not going to take a first step. I don't know where to step. Ask yourself, how might this fix itself? Or who do I know who could help me, right? Instead of going, I don't know how to do that. You just ask yourself those generative questions. How might this work? What might be possible? Your brain will surprise you. You think it's a crazy question?
Sure.
Yeah. But your brain will start to go, oh, well, you could do this and you could do that, right? But here's what we normally do. Why is that broken? Why is that not working? Well, again, your brain's going to give you an answer. Well, because you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you knew you were supposed to do that. That leaves you stuck, right? That doesn't help you move forward. But in shifting that question, how might we? How might I? Right? That opens up new possibilities. And then you ask yourself, what becomes possible when all of this is working the way I want it to? Those questions will elicit new ideas from you, but you got to pause, notice, and choose. So I definitely walk away with that. You can't do this when you're running on the hamster wheel and you're out of breath and you're sweating and you can't, like, your body is in fight flight in that moment, right? Things shut down. That's when you shut down. Just take a breath and pause, even if it's 5 minutes, and just ask yourself these questions, right? And it's the same thing with organizations. You're going to notice if you're leading a team, pay attention to what your folks are showing you. Are they looking like they're burnt out? Are they missing deadlines? Are they showing up like all in anxiety, but you're not seeing the return? Like, what is happening here? Look at your people, right? Yes, look at your numbers. They'll tell you where you are, where you're not, but you got to look at your people. And it's the same questions. Have your folks
people over profits first.
People over profit. And here's the key, right? We talked about conscious capitalism companies. The 4 tenets of conscious capitalism are conscious culture, higher purpose, conscious leadership, and stakeholder integration. Nowhere does it talk about profits, because when you are embodying those 4 tenets and all of your folks are, the profits naturally show up.
Of course.
Right? And so, yes, focus on what you want to create, the environment you want to create, and the profits will come.
Oh, I just really love that. And I love that you talk about the questions too. You know, it kind of reminds me, excuse me, of, like, I'm celebrating my 26-year wedding anniversary this week, so I'm kind of excited. But back in the day, many years ago, when I had gotten divorced from my starter husband, as I like to call it, from my starter husband, when I got divorced, because I'm the type of person who, if something's broke, what can I do to fix it? Like, that's just my natural thing. Like, I want to make sure, I don't want to make sure I don't have a pattern. So, like, I said, I'm going to go and see somebody. I'm going to hire somebody and ask that question. And they gave me an exercise that changed my life. It sounds similar, but my version of it for me. And I actually raised my children doing it too. And I see my children doing it with their children now, and I just love it. And the thing for me is it kind of centers around, what are our options? So whenever something happens to me, doesn't go well, or it's like, that's what I wanted to do, but I can't, or I'm feeling something. And I'm like, I'm just, I'm kind of bummed, or I'm overwhelmed, whatever that case may be. The question I ask myself all the time is, well, what are my options? What are my options? So for me, it's like, well, my options are, and I remember when I was raising my kids, right? And I remember specifically, for the sake of the story, I told my daughters she had done something, and I had put her on restriction, right, for the weekend, and she was whining. And I said, well, let's talk about it. Like, what are your options? And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, option number 1 is you could keep on whining like you are, and you're going to be grounded for 2 weekends, right? Second option is you could have a better attitude about it, and you've been saying there were some things you wanted to do, and now you could do those. Third option is you could spend some time with your family. Like, I listed her options. But what was funny is, even when they were little, I was like, what do you want for lunch? You want a peanut butter sandwich? You want a bologna sandwich, right? And like, I feel like it taught my children how to ask themselves better questions, how to make better decisions, and to be able to pull themselves out of it. I have to tell you, every time I catch myself still saying it, I actually sometimes say it out loud to myself. I'll be like, all right, Patty, so what are your options? Like, it's how I work through the problem, so to speak. And I hear my children do it too. And when they call me up, Mom, blah, 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 like, I don't know, what are your options? She's like, oh, yeah, that's right. Like, then they default to that. They're like, oh, well, what are my options? And it makes you think of possibilities, right? Here's all your possibilities. Choose which one is going to work for you. And if that doesn't work, guess what? Pick a different one. Like, you're not locked into that. So it's not the same. I kind of love your version of asking those questions even better. But I think that the idea of you don't have to stay stuck.
Yeah.
there is another option, right? You don't have to stay stuck. So I love this scale up framework because it's 5 things, right? 5 things. So, I think a lot of times people are like, oh, yes, I want to make a change. And they're like, oh, yeah, you need to do this. And then here's this big whole long checklist of all these things. And they're like, yeah, I do. But like, I don't have time for that, whatever. But 5 things, right? 5 things. I mean, you're not saying 5 things in 5 minutes. You're just saying 5 things, right? So I really feel like that is kind of powerful. Now, what I love about now that you've actually shared all this with us, you also have a gift for them that kind of works around this. So tell us a little bit about the gift. And for those of you who are listening, all you have to do is look below because there's a button right there for you to grab it. So
yes. So I've recorded a masterclass. It's 20-ish minutes. It's not that long, right? But it basically goes through the 5-step framework of scale up to help you get from stuck to unstoppable. And that's what I love about it, because it's the 5 steps to break free from the barriers that are keeping you stuck, to unlock possibilities for you to connect to, and then to execute your greatest vision with clarity, courage, and confidence. So it's 20 minutes. You can't go wrong listening to it. And some of the questions are in there to help you really connect and unlock the next level for you.
I love it. I think earlier in our conversation, I said I'd watched it 3 times. Like, I absolutely love it. It was very, very clear. You're very concise in doing it. And it's very easy to like pay attention and to get it and to really see it in yourself. So I have to tell you,
thank you.
He's giving it to you for free. You guys should all go and grab that for sure. So this is the portion of the show that I love to call #open-mic, where I like to ask our guests that, yes, you've given so much information, but this is the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast, right? So if you had to narrow it down to one marketing, media, money strategy, what would that strategy be?
It's got to be ask yourself generative questions, right? If you're asking yourself a question of why is this not working, that's a stuck question. That's not opening up possibilities for you. So focus on, instead of how, who can help me? Instead of why is this not working, how might I create it? The generative questions will take you to the next level all the time.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is wonderful. How can people connect with you? What is the best way for them to connect with you? Because I know they're going to want to.
Yes, I would love to connect with anyone who's interested. I'm on LinkedIn, TP Sunshine or Tina Parker. My website is leadoutsidethelines.com. You can go there and connect. And I look forward to having a conversation with folks, your leaders or your readers, your listeners, to help them get to the next level.
I love that. Thank you so much. And for those of you, she is our leadership expert in the Marketing, Media, and Money magazine. And every single issue of the magazine, she shares other resources that she also gives to you at no cost. So you're going to want to tap into that. She shares so generously from her heart. So thank you so much for saying yes when I asked you to write for my magazine as well.
And thank you for asking. It was such a blessing. Patty, you give so much from your heart. It is easy for any of us to come into your community and just share, because you are such a heartfelt leader. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to our audience. Thank you so much for week after week showing up. I appreciate it. I appreciate you, right? I appreciate it. I appreciate you. So if you enjoyed this episode, and I am sure that you did, please like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. We are now on YouTube. So subscribe to our YouTube channel at Marketing, Media, Money is our YouTube channel. And if you haven't already read our magazine, it is free, and we will give you a lifetime subscription, actually. So just go to m3magazine.com, m3magazine.com. Until next week, I hope you have a phenomenal week. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for joining us today on the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. To shorten your learning curve even more, make sure to grab your free copy of the Marketing, Media, and Money magazine at m3magazine.com. That's M, the number 3, magazine.com. I promise your business will thank you.